I'm 𝗪𝗫. I am a sacred ritualist who teaches ancient somatic practices that are backed by modern neuroscience. And my goal in my work is that I desire every woman and vulva being to reclaim their magic and power by reclaiming their relationship to their body with pleasure as the tool to do that. And it is about liberation from the oppressive conditioning that we have around our bodies and sexuality. And a little bit about me too. I am the pleasure witch. I'm a teacher. I'm a guide. I've been studying and teaching this work for 15 years. And I came to this work from my own deep suffering. And I now live a very magical, embodied life. And I am slutty. I'm queer. I'm gender expansive. My pronouns are actually they, she. And my work stands on the foundations of activism and intersectional advocacy, because I truly believe that you can only come so far in your self journey if you are not also uplifting the marginalized collective. So I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And I was looking forward to this conversation because when we had our first meeting call, I just felt like we had such good chemistry and we kept talking and talking, which is always a good sign because the format of my collaborations, I feel like I've been trying to pin it down more and more. I try to come up with questions that I want us to talk about, but as neurodivergent brains usually work, we kind of end up tapping into all these other different subjects, and it could become very formless, but all interconnected at the same time, you know?
Absolutely. And I find sexuality is really the foundation of our humanity, of our human life. It's actually how we regulate our nervous systems. There's very biological reasons why we desire it and crave it and get pleasure from it.
Yeah.
And we don't just have it for procreation, like Christianity tells us that's the case, but it biologically is not true. And it interweaves in all of our things we do in our life, but it's also a huge taboo. And so those two things kind of knock up against each other. And it's very interesting because we live our lives with a human body experiencing pleasure, and it interweaves everywhere we go.
And that's something I wanted us to just take our time to explore today, how sensuality and even sex is something that I think could be a very, very useful tool for neurodivergent folks, because I feel like the foundation of a lot of our struggles stems from, well, yes, there's the social aspect, but with this topic specifically, I'm thinking about the sensory sensitivities. Oftentimes, when we do have sensory sensitivities, we grow into adulthood becoming more and more disconnected from our bodies because we're trying to numb ourselves out from experiencing overstimulation. And we forget that part of being neurodivergent as well is having sensory joys, and being stimulated correctly is actually a very important aspect of tapping into your neurodivergence, your strengths, your unique abilities.
So my work in foundation is about coming home to your body. Your body is what you walk around with, whether you believe in the soul or whatever. You know, your body is what houses your life. And I really think that the systems that we live in, capitalism, patriarchy, sex negative, all these things, it actually brings us so disconnected from our bodies. And when we're neurodivergent, we live in this like overstimulation of a world around us where we're pigeonholed to act a certain way, yet we don't feel that authentic connection to how capitalism kind of forces us to exist. And so we get more and more disconnected as we mask and as we become overwhelmed inside of ourselves and more dysregulated. And for me too, personally, my journey was very like on the BPD spectrum. I had a lot of lashing out. I couldn't control my emotions. You know, you just think of like every time you want to cry and then you're told not to cry and you shove it down, right? It becomes this boiling pot. And instead of being in this primal connection with our body to just have emotions, let experiences move through it, let our body shake or do what it needs to do to just naturally exist. And those things are so inappropriate in our society. And I personally numbed a lot of it with drugs and alcohol. And when I was going through this journey and found this work, I became sober. I've been sober over 4 years now because I could actually be in my body. But before that, I could not. It was constant trying to escape because I was in hell inside of myself. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
I mean, speaking from my own experience, I used to work with autistic population, specifically in school systems. And I can literally attest to how people like me, people who are trained to work with that population, we're literally taught to teach autistic kids to not stim. That's inappropriate. We're literally taught to do all of these things in order to get them to stop stimming. It's just crazy to be able to root it back to that objective fact, because a lot of us don't really understand that we have all been taught again and again from a young age to keep our bodies still as possible, to not move it, to not stim, and even just not expressing it. Like if you're going through something, even just dysregulation, because sometimes it's not even about emotions. Sometimes you're just overwhelmed. Sometimes you're very dysregulated and you just have to move it out and regulate yourselves again. But you're forced to sit in a classroom for hours on end and you're not allowed to lash out in any way. And so it makes a lot of sense that we get to a point in later adulthood where we haven't even realized that we've grown so disconnected from our body until we start experiencing these more intense symptoms like running into walls when you're walking, or grabbing something and you're missing it, or not being able to understand when you're experiencing pain, or not being able to describe different sensations you're going through to your doctor. You know, these are ways that people can really start to tune in to whether or not they're connected to their bodies. Because if you don't even know how to describe your pain to your own doctor, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, then that's just a testament to how disconnected you are from your body. And that isn't even to go into, you know, our sex lives or our relationship to sex, because it gets more nuanced there, because that involves our relationship to ourselves, our body, our spirit, but it also involves social aspects of how we connect to other people. And oftentimes neurodivergent folks, they deviate from social norms, which makes sex, I find, either the only way you could connect authentically, or it's just another way you perform and you almost relinquish power over this area of your life that could be so sacred, but because you're constantly performing, it's almost taken away from you.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point. Let's not start stimulating the genitals right away and just jump to where we're told sex is. What if we just slowed down and could listen to our body in a more fully encompassing way to create trust with our own intuition and our own body? Because again, especially neurodivergence, I think people have a lot of trauma around this, but it is a general population thing as well, where again, we've been told, sit down, shut up, cross your legs, you know, especially if you're a woman or vulva being, especially if you're queer, these kinds of things, right? Don't deviate from acting in this very particular way. And what happens is we can't trust what our body's trying to speak to us about. So what if we slowed down and worked with that more encompassing relationship with our body, and then eventually got to the place that's really taboo, that's really charged, but because we live in a society where it's hard, fast, get it over with. So what if we could open the experience with our body to lead us to incredible sex and to find our sexuality, but first start with being able to articulate just what our intuition is telling us. What is your heart telling you? What is your gut telling you?
Yeah, and that's what I really wanted to focus on today's episode, is just how do we reconnect with sensuality? How do we reconnect with our pleasure? Because sensuality doesn't always have to be sexual, but I really do think sensuality can enhance your sex life or the way that you connect with people through sex, right? Because it brings so much more embodiment, pleasure, and it helps you get in tune with your body rather than disconnected from it. And I think this applies to neurodivergent people's lives as a whole, is even outside of sex, we should be reconnecting to our sensuality, because that is the core of the neurodivergent experience, is our relationship to sensory stimuli. What are the ways that you are stimulating yourself correctly? And I'm not even talking about self-pleasure at this point. I'm just talking about stimulating yourself through your senses. And I don't think a lot of neurodivergent adults are putting enough intention into stimulating themselves in a pleasurable way, in a way that regulates them, in a way that they can enjoy, because they're so used to trying to get away from stimulation because the world is so overstimulating. And so they come home and they just disconnect, when in reality, it would benefit us a lot more if we're constantly at every point finding ways to stimulate ourselves to either regulate or to better process, or to just feel joy, pleasure, connection. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a big aspect of what disconnects people from sex is taking the sensuality aspect out of it, because they're not feeling things through their body.
So if we go back to the neuroscience of it and we look at how the nervous system works, the nervous system is attuned to pain or pleasure. Those are its two signals of how it guides systems in our body subconsciously. So are we in a nervous system that is in a constant state of attunement to pain and avoidance of pain? Or are we in a nervous system that is attuned to pleasure and knows how to be in pleasure? And the thing with those two is that pain cycles and constantly avoiding pain, you're constantly in fight or flight, you're in survival mode, you're in that disconnect. That's where numbness comes from, because you're so overstimulated with this could be painful, or something could go wrong, or I could do something wrong, to then you can't go through the rest and relaxation portion of your nervous system to then go into pleasure, because pleasure is the attunement of replenishment, vitality. It actually gives our mitochondria, like on a cellular level, signal that you can restore yourself in your body, as opposed to constantly depleting and draining yourself in that pain cycle. And what happens in our society too is, because most of us are stuck in that fight or flight survival mode, we then are looking for the quick dopamine hits to get us out of it. So craving a chocolate bar, sugar, McDonald's, TikTok scrolls, or whatever it is. And that's why a lot of people will then go like masturbate to de-stress or fall asleep. I just need to jerk off with my vibrator for 5 minutes, quickly get it over with, watch porn, and just have this disconnection as opposed to connection. And they're doing that in those quick cycles, quick dopamine hits, as opposed to actually connecting with your body, creating sustainable dopamine to move through the rest and relaxation to then restore. And the thing is too, is when you start coming home to a nervous system that's embodied, it feels scary. It feels boring. It feels annoying. Like, why would I do this, right? But you could go to a yoga class and do one downward dog and say that you went to do yoga and you do yoga. You could technically say that, but it's not actually going to change your life, right? And so when we start connecting to sensuality with the world around us and attuning to pleasure, that's when, like, okay, I still want a dessert, but let's take 20 minutes to slowly, luxuriously enjoy this dessert, as opposed to just scoff it down because I'm craving sugar, right? How can we open it up, drag it out, smell the flowers, like literally when we walk down the street, as opposed to like, oh, that's a nice flower. No, like, let's stop for a second. Let's stick our nose in it. Let's feel the sensation of our nose against the flower. Let's rub around in it a little bit. And then let's take a whiff and like let that smell flow through our whole body and connect to the aliveness and the connection of the world around us, as opposed to just like, oh, that smells nice, and then on your way, right? You see what I mean? It's about changing our life. And I mean, in my work, I call this changing into an orgasmic life, and seeing even orgasm as not just this quick sensory thing that we're trying to just achieve and then roll over and go to bed. It's expanding the whole picture of it and attuning to it, as opposed to just being in this avoidance of pain.
It's almost like we're treating ourselves like a machine, which I think is just a result of living in our capitalistic society. And I'm sure some countries are worse with this than others, because I could be wrong. So if any of my viewers are in countries where it's just slower than how it is in America, I feel like I've seen some countries are just culturally more sensual. They care more about a slower life. They care about taking their time. Whereas in America, it's very much so not leisurely at all. It's very much, you have to go from point A to B. You don't linger. You just do what you need to do, and then you leave. If there's nothing you're doing there, then there's no business for you to be there. And then all of a sudden, it's like it creates this momentum of constantly needing to do something and feeling extremely lost when you have nothing to do. But at the same time, it's that nothingness where you have time and ability and space to actually just connect with your body, your breath, your pleasure, your sensuality. I always try to encourage other neurodivergent folks to take the things they already love to experience and build around it. Make it more than just eating a dessert. Make it a whole, fully immersive experience. So if dessert is something you're tasting, right? What can you do visually to add to that experience? What are you feeling when you're eating the dessert? Do you feel like it's your own little sensual check-in time with yourself? And would lighting candles make that a better experience? If you're really attuned to colors and how that affects you, maybe having light bulbs where you could change the color of the light to match your mood. That could be a really great way to just check in with yourself and how you're feeling and what you want to emulate. And what can you listen to while you're eating the dessert? Is there certain music that might evoke emotion and get you in tune with your body and almost make you taste? I'm thinking about the movie Ratatouille, how when he eats the food, he actually experiences all of these synesthetic sort of things in his brain. Us as neurodivergents are like that. And if you're not tapping into that, it's not because you can't, it's because you're not letting yourself. All of this to say, I think a really great way to start in a practical way is to just tune into what parts of your life you look forward to, even if it's something as small as eating a dessert at the end of the day, even if it's something as small as your skincare routine, even if it's just, watering your plants in the morning. Don't just see it as something you have to do and check off your list. Actually build around it. Add sensory stimuli to it, and not just randomly. Tune into what that ritual means to you. What does it mean to you to go around and water your plants? It's not just a chore, or it shouldn't be. And if it is just a chore, it's probably why you don't really like it that much. But if it's a way for you to kind of tune into your environment and yourself and this feeling of nourishment and relaxation, maybe attune certain lighting or music or whatever it is, or maybe even just the clothes you're wearing, and have it all match the feeling of nourishment, relaxation, and nurturance,
Creating ritual and romanticizing our life is so important. Think about how we lived before we got in this chaos of capitalism, right? We had ritual to life. I used to live in Nepal as well as in the Middle East, and not in like Dubai, Middle East, but like Jordan, Lebanon, like deep Middle East. And in both of those cultures, they had ritual everywhere they went in life. Muslim people pray 5 times a day and have to create that container 5 times a day. come home to yourself in the moment, connecting to spirit. Sometimes neurodivergent people, we get stuck in what is practical versus what is not practical. And you can make ritual very practical. It doesn't have to be this thing where you have to set up for 10 minutes, right? Like I have an altar behind me here. So every time I pass it, things like I have easy lighting that I can just light or whatever it is, right? I create ease in it to make it practical, because I think that's another thing really preventing people. Again, like when we think of sex as just this very specific moment of like chasing towards this very specific type of orgasm, right? We think of all the other things as like, oh, this is going to take so much time. And well, like you go to yoga class for an hour or whatever it is, right? Why can't you make an hour of spending that time to ritualistically connect with yourself? Why are we missing that? Why is that so difficult? And there's more reasoning to that trauma and how we hold these things in our body. But it's really a practice. And what you're describing is attuning to living your life in a different way and building it as a skill. It is a skill to be built, because if we think of, oh, I should just be able to have sex in this amazing way that everyone says you should be able to do just naturally, it's just really not true, because we're not attuned to our bodies. We're not attuned to how to bring another nervous system with us, right? Mm-hmm. Again, a long time ago, we used to live in community. Our bodies, nature, spirit were all very easily connected. We weren't scrolling on our phones. We didn't have 9-to-5 jobs. Mm-hmm. We had community to take care of our kids, whatever it was, right? But we lived an embodied, immersive, communal experience, and we don't live like that anymore. So it is really a skill to reattune yourself in that way. And you have to want it. You have to make a practice out of it and go and choose it.
Let's talk a little bit more about what that would look like, because I feel like a lot of neurodivergent people have a very specific sort of pacing when it comes to sensuality and sex, because we are so sensory sensitive, and obviously over time that affects our nervous system and that affects our objective personality and things like that. So when it gets really complicated like that, what are ways that we can honor our different pacing levels while still being able to tune into our sensuality rather than just almost giving up on it completely?
First, you want to think of when you're in a sensual experience, especially with another human or with yourself, are you in your head the whole time? Like, are you not there? Are you numb and disconnected? Or are you trying to, hone the skill of coming back to the present moment? It's really about creating safety. So little things like locking the door. Okay, even if no one else lives in your house or apartment or whatever it is, little things like that can truly help you feel a lot safer. Because think about your first experiences with sexuality. If you're in your bedroom touching yourself or with, your first teenage partner, and the parent walks in and yells at you or whatever it is, right? Little things like that. Or lighting, big thing with lighting and neurodivergence, right? If the lights are on overhead, there's no way I'm getting off. Like, there's just no way. I literally bring lighting to dates. Like, I have these tantric sex dates and I bring lighting. I don't know if you can see like the fake candles behind me.
Oh, I see.
I'll like bring a tote bag.
I love that.
Stuff in it, and lighting will be one of them. Because lighting is super important to me. Sound, right? A lot of people think, oh, music is going to help me get in my body. Yes, it can in some ways, but actually for the most part, music helps us attune to music, not our own bodies. So I personally like silence or music without words that's like slow and dropping in. A lot of people like have the TV on when they're having sex or whatever, right? It's like, okay, that's something else to distract you. Or having your animal in the room can either make you feel safer or less safe, right? The animal's watching you.
Oh,
you're always like, oh, this is so awkward, right? So bring it outside the room, right? these little things actually really add up. Like, what are the color and texture of the sheets? Are they clean? Did you have a shower? Whatever it is, right? And that slowness of dropping in, like, let's just lay here and like attune to each other's breath at first. Let's just take some breaths into the bottom of our lungs, as opposed to this, this anxiety breathing, right? What if we just breathed first? Because breathing, liberating our body, and liberating our voice are the three ways actually to drop into our primal nervous system, out of our head and into our body. And most of us are having these experiences with very short breath. We're locking our bodies, we're clenching tightly. You're not making any noise, or you're making the noises you see in those videos that are acting. So what happens if you could just be able to take a sigh with like a, like, let your breath come out, let your noise come out a little bit. How is it to relax, right? And it's really cool because partners can learn each other and learn the skill of attuning to each other and help each other with it.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. Where do I want to start? Okay, I'll start here. What I think is really interesting is that we're finally learning the science behind certain sensory stimuli like lighting, sound, textures, where it's not just this abstract concept of, oh, if you have candles, it'll just help you feel more sensual. Because I think a lot of the times people would assume this sort of conversation is woo-woo. And what I love as an autistic person who has very mechanical thinking, but is also very intuitive, is that these things aren't abstract. They're not woo-woo. They're not this like random concept that we've made up. There's actual science behind it. And we finally are coming out with more and more research to explain why certain sounds will elicit your body to feel a certain way. For example, I imagine when you're trying to get in tune with your body and your sensuality and drop in, music with no words and is more rhythmic would help with that, rather than fast, or I don't know.
Like, if it's a song and it has words, you're going to be thinking of that song. You're not going to be in your body. Your nervous system will choose any chance it gets to escape itself.
Yeah.
Because if you have been in those patterns your whole life, it's going to choose that every single time because it feels safer doing that. Doing the new thing and being in your body is terrifying. If you've ever heard of The Body Keeps the Score, which I don't actually recommend that book, read The Deepest Well instead. He stole his work from her. But your body holds imprinting of traumatic experience, is of emotions that you weren't allowed to express, whatever it was. And so being in your body, you will take every chance to escape. It's a subconscious survival technique. It's not something we actually have that much control over until we relearn it, essentially.
So you basically want to train yourself to want to drop into your body rather than escape it.
Learn how to be liberated in your body and somatically process your body. So the other big thing with sex and why humans experience sex without just procreating and why it's pleasurable is because it is somatic processing. So again, the word of The Body Keeps the Score just is to the point, even though, again, I don't like that book. But our body's holding on to these experiences that are negative, mostly because we typically, in a lot of experiences too, if you laugh too loud, you're not even allowed to have that joy, right? Or if you get a grade that's really good, you're not even allowed to celebrate because that's bragging, right? So think of all the so-called positive and negative. In Tantra, we like to think about it as they're just experiences. They're light and shadow, but they're all beautiful and they're all sacred experiences. Your rage is just as sacred as your ecstasy. And it's so important to be able to process it and experience it. And that's really what sex is. Sex brings us from our top of our nervous system, which is our cortex, our thinker, through our limbic, which is our emotions, and then into that primal place, which is where we hold those experiences that we were holding back from. when you learn to shake your body, let it liberate and move, when you learn to let your voice express itself, when you learn to breathe deeper, those will actually process those experiences. And this is neurology. This will actually process it out of your body so you can live more in that rest, relaxation, regulated nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're holding on to those experiences all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's biological reason why we like sex and we want to have it, because it actually processes those things. And if we're holding back from having those experiences, I think a really tangible example is if someone cries during sex. It feels natural. It feels like a release. It feels like something you just need to do in that moment. But then typically you have a partner going, oh my God, don't cry. Why are you crying? Something's going wrong. Oh my God. Right? Because they don't know that crying is just a totally natural, beautiful part of being a human and important to process. And it doesn't really matter what it's relevant to, if it's a specific memory or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter because it all just processes through that. And so once we learn the skill of being able to just be in our bodies and let it liberate, then our life feels more liberated because we are not holding all those stories and experiences and emotions anymore. They're not weighing us down. So instead of the skill of trying to just drop into your nervous system, it's more the skill of being at home in your body and being okay and feeling safe to just experience your body.
Ooh, I'm getting chills. That was so good. Which is just the hardest thing for a lot of neurodivergent people, because we've spent our whole lives masking over not just our external self, but the internal self as well, where a lot of my viewers will comment on my videos saying, I don't even know who I am when I'm alone at home. That's how extensive their mask is. I've even heard some people say that they don't even let themselves feel excited or happy at home because they feel embarrassed. It's like you have this feeling that people are watching you even if you're not being watched, because that's what it takes to mask as a neurodivergent person and assimilate to society. And so you talk again and again about this idea of getting into your primal self. How can we tune more into that? Because I think that is the part a lot of neurodivergent folks are so not practiced in. What is it like to be in tune with that primal state? What does that look like? What does it feel like? And how can we start tapping into it more?
There's a few layers here. So often substances might bring us there, but it's actually disconnecting us more than it's connecting us, because you're not learning the skill with yourself. So it's a bit complicated when it comes to substances. I do believe in sobriety. It's my lifestyle and such. I also believe your pleasure and orgasm and all that will be better in sobriety, but I also believe in empowering you with whatever your journey is. So if that's something that is helpful in your journey at this moment, go for it. But can you do it in tuned? Can you do it connected? Can you do it with intention? And when we're trying to build this skill of taking off our mask or not being in the societal structure all the time. I mean, a silly way of putting it is maybe leaning into the cringe, right? Like those moments you feel embarrassed and cringy, they become easier if you experience them with like more like, okay, I'm just allowed to be cringy right now and I'm just going to do it. And if you've ever met me in person or know me in person, I'm a very unhinged person. Like you can't bring me anywhere if you feel cringe. Like I'm loud, I'm embodied, I'm wild, I'm really, really liberated. Have you ever been to a dance floor sober and just like lost yourself in the movement and the experience, right? Some people have never experienced that, some people have. Or even like on a roller coaster where you're experiencing joy and wild experience that you're lost in it. You're no longer in your head. Hiking even, right? Or sitting in nature where you just like lose yourself in nature for a moment because you're looking at something so beautiful. Food is a great experience as well. Really losing yourself in the experience of eating an amazing dish. Attuning to this place where we can start to lose ourselves in getting out of our head and into the experience. Safety to expand and explore, right? Like I said earlier, you need to have safety in order to explore anything. So when we are really conditioned with shame, societal pressure, all these stories about sexuality that are put on us that aren't even ours necessarily, maybe they are ours, maybe we want to keep them, but to go in and be able to really dissect that. Which stories are ours and which stories are society's, and which ones do we want to get rid of and which ones do we want to explore otherwise. So creating that safety to actually explore. And then it gets into projection, because someone who doesn't feel safe in their own experience to explore and expand their own authentic journey with it is going to feel threatened by the idea that someone else is exploring their authenticity. And I think this is really a root of transphobia, a really root of sex negativity. When you are in that fear, locked down in yourself, you're again going to do everything to stay in that controlled box because you feel safer there than the idea of exploring all these pieces.
It's so important as a neurodivergent person who may struggle with an inherent sense of shame to be very, very fiercely dedicated to creating a safe space for you to express yourself freely, explore freely, release freely, first on your own. Because if you can't even do that by yourself, which sadly is very common for a lot of neurodivergents, then how are you supposed to do that with another person? What happens when you come across someone who will look at you weird when you are expressing a certain aspect of yourself? And what happens when, I mean, almost in a worse way, you come across someone who wouldn't judge you, but you're judging yourself? That is really sad when I see it happen. So you have to almost get to a point where you're building enough confidence, comfort in being able to explore these parts of yourself, immerse yourself in it, experience it, so that when you do bring another person into that experience, you can hold your own space in a way, whether they support it and want to be a part of it or they're getting triggered by it and are projecting onto you. You could stay sovereign in your own truth without having to question yourself, which is so common for a lot of neurodivergents, is constantly questioning yourself when you're objectively just doing your own thing and it's not wrong. But you always feel like if someone were to question me, there must be something wrong and I have to figure out what I have to change. You have to get used to knowing your own truth, sticking by it without necessarily having to invalidate other people, because there's multiple truths. Something that's true to you doesn't have to be true to others. Something that pleasures you doesn't have to pleasure others.
When you live at the foundation of your own existence, your own human experience, your own body talking to you and connecting with you, when you live in that, you become empowered. And your life around you reflects that. Your relationships start to reflect that. And that's also why I think community is so important. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people deeply isolate ourselves because we have been burned a lot with relationships, a lot of friend betrayal. And that's why I can't advocate more for the kink community, the lifestyle, sex positive community, and queer community. Oh my gosh, right? We're the people who like went past the societal norms and we're like, we're not going to put up with that. And we're going to be accepting and we're going to include more people. And we're going to, you know, have that intersectional holding of uplifting each other because we are marginalized. It's just a beautiful way to connect with people in a more expanded sexuality and sensuality that isn't about the thing that can be very intimidating and scary for us, right? Like sex, you know, especially sex with someone new, has a lot of these, you know, protection, STIs, pregnancy, there's a lot of these other factors too that we have anxiety about. So how can we create connection with other humans or with our own body in ways that give us less anxiety, that feel safer?
Since a lot of neurodivergent folks struggle with PDA, which is supposed to be pathological demand avoidance, but a lot of people are trying to reclaim that and say it's more so a pervasive drive for autonomy. So the essence of it is you want to make sure that you are the one who's able to make your choices and you don't feel like you're being swayed or controlled in any way. But I think this is so ingrained into the neurodivergent nervous system sometimes, where even perceived obligation or expectation is enough to get us into that fight or flight mode, where all of a sudden we don't even know if we want to or not, because we just want to say no. No, this is too much pressure. I don't like this. I'm just going to opt out. So sometimes I think the way that this could present in our sex lives is if someone, let's say, is inviting you out to get dinner, we might think to ourselves, what are they expecting? Do they think I'm supposed to owe them something? So you might just opt out of dinner altogether. Or if you're living with a partner, even just them coming up to you and hugging you a little bit longer, you start thinking, what does this mean? Do they expect this to go somewhere? If so, then that means I don't want the hug. So for people who have PDA, how can we be mindful of that in our relationships or in our sex life, where we could still tune in with our sensuality and still be able to have sex and be connected while being mindful of our nervous system responses to having PDA?
Do the people in the relationship feel like they can actually speak up for how they feel? Do you actually know your yes and no? And do you feel like you could actually say yes and actually say no? Saying yes can be just as hard as saying no. Okay. A lot of people just approach sex in this sense of like, oh, I'm just going to like let the experience happen to me. They don't have any autonomy over it because they don't feel empowered by being able to use their voice. And one of the first practices I teach in my school is how to have consent with your own body. Because if you don't know consent with your own self, how are you going to know it with someone else? Consent with someone else is one thing, but what is consent with my own body? So learning that practice with our own body first. How do I say yes and no? How does my body actually be able to talk to me? Then bringing it into partnership and literally having checks and balances. Like your partner should have the enough attunement with you if they're having sex with you to know if that your body is starting to say a no. You shouldn't have to necessarily always be having to say it verbally. There's an attunement that is deeper there that should be practiced. But at the same time, you can also make a safe environment to be able to say yes and no. And a very basic practice like that would be, okay, let's put the clock on for 5 minutes. You're going to ask for something. I'm going to do it for 30 seconds. And then I'm going to ask you if I can do something for you. And you're going to say yes or no. And just like literally practice saying yes or no. And the partner not getting butthurt about it. And the partner just being like, okay, yes or no, you know, like actually the partner receiving it as well, because how the partner receives it is what's being perceived of why you can't say yes or no. It's about creating a relationship of that, not just in the bedroom, but can this partner speak up and say no for other things in your life too, right? Yeah.
That's actually really good advice. Providing containers for frequent check-ins, especially when you're first trying to develop that relationship and attunement. Maybe you guys aren't fluent in what yeses or nos look like or if you want it. So purposefully setting smaller containers where it's like 5 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever, where you have to check in at the end of it, I think is really, really helpful when you have that PDA nervous system. And I want to second everything that you just said, where when you do have PDA and you're in partnership or having sex with other people, you almost have to make sure that the other person makes you feel safe enough where when you do give an answer, you know it's going to be respected. And when I say respected, I don't just mean they're cool with it, but secretly they're disappointed and frustrated and things like that, or they accept it and yeah, they'll stop, but maybe they won't ever talk to you again. When I say respected, it
Weaponize
means
it.
yeah. When I say respected, it means their perception of you and how they're willing to treat you will not change depending on your response or what you're willing to do or not do. So the way that I see it is you don't feel like you're going to be punished for communicating your truth and what you want or don't want. You don't feel like you're going to be judged, misunderstood, criticized, or even abandoned. Because oftentimes I think that's something that we're trying to avoid and is very, I think, invisible sometimes, is that even if someone were to respect your no's, there's this underlying, they won't see us the same, or they won't put as much effort or intention into us because we're not giving them what they want. And
Absolutely.
I think that's kind of the foundation for a lot of PDA folks, is we constantly feel like we're being threatened for simply living our truth. And it creates a very broken dynamic of saying yes or no, because we just want to feel like we have autonomy and power. We're going to be respected regardless. And it becomes really confusing when we're talking about sex, something that's so vulnerable, and you're naked, you're sharing a very intimate act with someone, an intimate space, right? You want to be able to surrender, but then your nervous system is constantly going against that because the relationship dynamic and your sexual dynamic almost becomes separate in a sense.
Yeah.
Maybe we could kind of explore what that means. How can we start to integrate our neurodivergence into our relationships and social dynamics in a way where it doesn't negatively affect our sex life?
Absolutely. And the first thing I want to bring up there too is giving you a gray area. Like, it doesn't have to be yes or no, black and white. It can be a maybe.
Yeah.
It can be a no, but if you did this, it might be a yes. So to create spaciousness for the evolution of what a yes or no might be, right? Like, if it can be a yes, it doesn't mean it's a yes the whole way through, right? It can turn into a no, and letting the fluidity of that, that's what's really cool about kink, I would say too. When I'm space holding in general, I will ask people like to recheck in with themselves. Is this still a yes? Or when I'm in a dom scenario where I'm holding space for a sub to surrender with me, I will check in many times throughout the whole session, and I'll say traffic light. So red, green, yellow, or green, yellow, red, I guess. So the green is like, yeah, this is still a fuck yes. Red is like, nope, this is a no now. Let's transition. Let's integrate the experience. And then yellow is like, I don't know. I'm reaching an edge, maybe. So creating that spaciousness for that. The other thing is to, are you in a dynamic of your relationship that feels obligatory a lot? Like, are you in a patriarchal system relationship? I think the most common example, but it can definitely happen in any type of gender dynamic. But, you know, if you're a woman with a man and the man has lived his whole life in typical patriarchy where he just exists as being allowed to get what he wants all the time, if he then guilts you with sex like that, then it's going to be a real problem, right? And also, does that man have a relationship with himself? If you stopped sex, would he get mad and annoyed with it? Or would he be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go and have an hour, you know, making love to myself and satisfy myself that way, and I'm at peace with that? Right? Like, most partners would never say that that's the case. If it was me, I do, no problem. But most people don't have that even self foundation, right? So you should both have that and both be working towards that. I mean, that's ultimately what a conscious relationship is, but most people don't exist in conscious relationships. They just live in the patterns of the typicality that we've been taught, which is absolutely not what I encourage.
I love that. And I think that is so neurodivergent friendly. So you guys listening, take note and start integrating this in your life, even if you don't have PDA. Because as neurodivergent folks, we're not only needing to tune into our emotions, but we also have to tune into our relationship with the other person. So that's social, which we struggle with all these things. We struggle with knowing our emotions. We struggle with social dynamics because we're not neuronormative. And then the third thing, which is very objective that we could often forget about, is the sensory aspect. So if you have to be mindful of all three of these things, and if at any point any of these things start to feel uncomfortable in any sort of way, you have to be able to honor that and feel safe enough to say, I was green light this whole time, but I'm kind of getting to an orange light or red light. So we need to check in with that and be able to stop or adjust. Because the way that I see it is, as a neurodivergent, there's a more sensitive threshold in which you could be thrown off. And you have to create practices to check in very often if any of those things get thrown off, and you're able to attune to it and accommodate it as soon as it happens, which is the number one thing that we ignore, which is why we grow disconnected in the first place, because we learn to not attune, because we learn to ignore rather than accommodate. And then we get to the point where we don't even know how we're doing emotionally, sensorially, or relationally, because we just numb ourselves to get through the moment. And then we don't get to experience pleasure, connection, or anything.
Yes. Make it easy, make it practical. If you're in bed with someone and it's yellow going to red and you feel really emotional about that, like, are you allowed to cry in that moment when you're asked, right? Or is it going to be met with like, oh, stop, like, oh, don't cry, like, are you allowed to just be met and have an emotion? And another really great tool, I encourage everyone, weekly check-ins in general, just for your relationship, but one of my favorite tantric tools, and it seems so simple, but it is profound, is after you have sex, have an integration conversation. And this means that one person takes the floor and just shares their whole experience without the other person reacting. So if they're saying like, oh, and then you did that and I didn't really like, and the other person's like, oh my God, so sorry, I'll never do that again. No, the other person is supposed to hold in very neutral way. Just let them have the experience and express it, and then switch. And the other person isn't allowed to like react of like the points that they just went over. Yes, there's going to be some crossover, but try not to react to the points your partner just said. Instead, just have your own isolated, neutral experience with explaining the experience you just had. And then you will see this attunement grow between you in this very natural way, because you were met with neutrality and just held to express. And you'll notice after you express yourself, you'll be like, oh, I could just like be a human and have an experience. And again, it seems so simple, but it is deeply profound. And it's actually hard for people to do because, again, most people have sex where they just roll over and go to sleep after. They don't have the integration period. They don't have this aftercare. Like in kink, we talk about aftercare. So important. You should have aftercare with every type of sex that you have. And even if you get into like me, I mean, I'm really into like intellectualizing things and such. My partner and I, we open a channel after we have sex for like deep, profound, historic, spiritual conversations.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
And so intertwined with the experience we were just having, and then opening it for like, history. And so it just, and how all the dynamics interplay in life. So you can even get like wild and profound off of it, but start with basics. Go slow. They are profound and important. That's a big thing too in my work. We always come back to the basics because they are so important, so foundational. They're so profound. Yeah. The idea that someone could ask you how you're doing during is actually incredible.
Yeah.
So.
I love all these tips you're giving because it's not only practical, but something as simple as aftercare, check-ins, integration conversation would make the world of a difference.
Literally.
honestly
It would change the
life-changing.
world.
Yes.
Literally, it would change your whole world and it would change the actual world. Like, honestly, I'm not joking here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Because so many good things. On one hand,
one point there too, you'll notice too, like say you use the light system,
yeah.
you'll notice out in life, you're in the most conventional conservative place you could be in, the grocery store or at a wedding or whatever, and then something will be happening and your partner will go green, yellow, or red, and it will connect you to your sexuality. You'll probably have a little laugh about it, and then you'll be able to express yourself. So you'll notice how it crosses over so well. And when you're in a sexual experience, like I said, you're in this deeper part of your nervous system. You're in your more subconscious primal nervous system, and you're connecting to that. So you'll see how you'll cross it over in your world, and how fun and exciting it will actually be, and create ease in communication.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's kind of the theme of this whole episode, is that these practices that we can integrate in our sex lives to make it so much better, more pleasurable, more embodied, is applicable to everything else in our life. Where can you feel sensuality and pleasure in other aspects of your life, like eating or crocheting, things like that? And also, how can we do energetic check-ins outside of sex? Like if you're out and about and you don't feel like communicating and you're overstimulated, just being able to say red, for example, so much quicker, so much easier, and you gain so much more support because you're less focused on explaining yourself to someone to make them understand, and you just already have that inherent knowing and check-in. And maybe even just you guys have a practice of, if you're red, this is usually how we respond to it. So if you're red, my job is to help get you to a more quiet location, no questions asked, no conversation needed. That makes such a big difference when you're neurodivergent, especially autistic.
And we can go nonverbal, or maybe
Exactly
nonverbal.
Yeah.
And so, maybe you have those 3 colors on you.
Exactly.
You cut them out in felt and you can, or whatever, right? There's so many inventive ways to work with it.
Yeah, especially because if you're autistic, you have, the double empathy problem, where what we look like on the surface and how we communicate it may not translate to what we're experiencing. So when I'm shut down, I look the same. It would be hard for people to register that I'm going through red.
Yeah.
And when I'm shut down, I also can't communicate. I lose access to my words, processing language. And so if I didn't have any system of red, yellow, green, the person would just assume everything was fine, and I'm slowly spiraling downward more and more. But especially for other people who relate to that experience, where they have less of a stereotypical way of expressing themselves and their emotions, having those signals really does help get your loved ones in tune with you a lot quicker and more effectively.
Totally.
And I really loved what you said about the integration conversation, being very intentional about the person sharing. That's their space to share, to be understood. This is such a common thing that I see in all types of relationships, whether it's family, friends, or partners, where the person vulnerably shares in hopes of trying to gain support and improve the relationship. But then the other person responding to it, whether it's judgment or feeling extremely bad, even if it doesn't come from bad intentions, it shifts the dynamic where the person who's sharing and looking for support becomes the person who has to now support the other.
Yes. Yeah.
And I love that you are really distinguishing the dynamics here, the roles, because roles are so important. When we're both approaching this conversation, am I the sharer and are you the listener? And how do we stick to those roles so that it doesn't get mixed in the process?
Yeah. And holding each other accountable. Like if, you share something and your partner starts reacting to it, be like, you're not allowed to react right now. You're not allowed.
Exactly.
Stop. This is about me.
Yes.
Holding each other accountable with these things. And it can get silly and jokey too. It doesn't have to be super serious all the time. But I think, that is a big tip for neurodivergent people. But honestly, everyone, because I know neurodivergent people, we love rules. We love like actual rules. And again, that's why people love kink. I'm telling you. Try kink if you're neurodivergent.
Rules or roles?
Both.
I love roles.
Yeah, both. um, but for everyone, anyone who's listening, because we learned these rules in such an arbitrary way, and whoever we are, we need to deconstruct those and create our own is really what it's about. And that will be able to have your magic thrive, your creativity, your vitality thrive, because you now feel empowered with your sense of self, and you're more attuned to pleasure than pain. And you can thrive with your own vitality, relationships. You are worthy and deserving of having epic, incredible sex, love, and relationships. You're born in a human body to experience profound pleasure that you can unlock, and you are worthy and deserving of it. It is your birthright, just being a human. So.
Oh my gosh, I wrote that down. Oh yeah, okay, it's here. This whole thing is about reclaiming your body. And I wrote down, your body is connected to your truth, your experience, and your existence. And if you're not reclaiming that, you're really robbing yourself of the human experience that you get to have, but you're not letting yourself have it. This is why I'm so passionate about neurodivergent folks reclaiming their sensuality, because we are fundamentally sensual beings.
Absolutely.
And if you don't consider yourself sensual, it's not because you're not. I think it's just because you've become disconnected from it. And this is why I want to keep encouraging people who follow my work to prioritize your sensuality and your sensual experiences as the foundation over everything else, because this is the difference between neurodivergent informed work versus not. When you start to prioritize the very fundamental, simple things like your body and your sensuality, and you really hone in on it, all of these other symptoms that you're trying to fix will automatically resolve without you needing to even pay attention to it.
Absolutely.
So depression, anxiety, whatever it is, those things you don't even have to think about or pay attention to. It'll resolve itself as a result of you doing things in your life that actually makes you feel connected, makes sense, regulates you, provides flow. I mean, how many of you guys have been trying to work on your anxiety your whole life, but here you are still struggling with it every day? And it's like you feel so hopeless. What do I even do? Medication doesn't work. I've tried therapy. I've tried to do this, and that, and it's still here. My philosophy is like, if you've tried something multiple times in different ways and you're still trying and it's still not working, that's a good indication to pivot and try to use your energy for other things and direct it elsewhere, and then keep your eye out for whether or not those things end up resolving on their own.
How are you ever going to feel control over your life if your body feels like it's not yours?
Yeah.
If the home of what you exist in, you feel numb and disconnected from, how are you ever going to feel like you have a grasp of your own life, your own truth, your autonomy, your own authenticity? How are you ever going to reclaim that if you're disconnected from your body? And, most of us, we become that way because we're traumatized. It's deeply intertwined. And we have stories of, childhood being touched or whatever, boundaries being crossed, coercion, all these things. When you learn how to go through the process of reclaiming your body as yours, that is when it starts to get returned to you. I mean, I have had so many students come through my school and say, I've tried so many different things, but now I feel like my body's actually mine. Now I actually feel pleasure inside of me, not just pain.
Yeah.
And it's foundation to so much of us.
Chills.
And these are ancient somatic practices. They are backed by modern neurology. They have more profound effects than psychedelic therapy even, and all these things. But learning that autonomy, coming home to your body, deeply, deeply powerful.
A metaphor that I thought about for this is shelter dogs, how a lot of them, when you bring them home, have this layer of trauma in their nervous system because they weren't raised in a very stable, consistent, safe environment. And for people who adopt those pets, it's almost like they have to commit to fostering a safe, consistent environment for however long it takes for that dog to get out of survival mode. It's not just you sitting there and telling your dog, you're safe now. You're in a good place. I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life and you're going to never miss a meal. They're not going to understand that.
Yeah.
They're not going to process that intellectually and be like, you're right. I have a bed. I have a blanket. You feed me, things like that. And you have to think of your body in that same way. We don't respond to words and concepts as much as it is just about fostering the sensation of safety and being consistent in that and being able to attune to that every single time.
Yeah. How long have you been carrying this weight of this anxious, avoidant nervous system that you live in? How much is it costing you to keep carrying it, right?
Yeah.
If you stayed the same the rest of your life like this, like what is it actually costing you?
Mm-hmm.
What is it to actually try something different, commit to something else, and hopefully pursue it in a trauma-informed nervous system way? Because there's also a lot of mess out there too.
Yeah.
But it's not that quick pill fix. I know we feel like we want that because trauma happens hard, fast, and non-consensual. Our trauma body from inside of us is like, I want the quick fix because we want to get out of it. But it is about that slowness gives us so much information that we want to eventually come home to.
I think that shelter dog metaphor is perfect because if you have a shelter dog, you wouldn't just let your dog go to any dog park or hang out with any dog.
Yeah, and you wouldn't expect it to change overnight.
Exactly, because if your dog has a certain layer of trauma that they'll live with for the rest of their life, even if they've come out of survival mode, it takes one time of you bringing your dog to the park or the dog park and another dog thinking they're playing with your dog to activate it. There's just certain aspects of yourself as a neurodivergent that I feel like you have to commit to attuning to for the rest of your life. And it's not supposed to be a chore. It's just a part of your experience. You don't get to just let yourself go out and connect with anyone in any way. You have to be intentional about it the way that you would care for your shelter dog. For example, if they're scared of loud noise, you're going to have to commit to every 4th of July, making sure that you're building the whole environment to make them feel safe so that they don't absolutely freak out and come apart when the fireworks go off. And I think it's important to think of your body in the same way, not in terms of it being a burden, but in terms of I deserve that care, that intention, and beautiful things can still be experienced and created if I am intentional about it,
And what is really cool about the nervous system and the science behind it is you can actually repattern so much of it. And if you live more in that intentionality and you've done the trauma work, then you will see that, say 4th of July fireworks is your trigger. You will see how much more you will be able to actually experience it because you'll live in a different nervous system. So you'll be intentional about these parts of you that are triggered for sure, but you'll also see such a difference. I mean, me personally, that's huge part of my story is I completely changed my whole nervous system. And if you think you've done the work, go home to your parents. That's always like the biggest trigger for everyone. So you'll find one day you'll be able to go home to your parents and it won't trigger you as much anymore, whatever it is. But it still does in some ways, but you have the structure and the comfort of knowing how to intentionally work through that. You'll live with more autonomy. This is what being liberated is all about, is being able to live your life. It's
not the lack of pain, but just the relationship of knowing how to respond to it properly.
Because you're more attuned to pleasure, you'll be able to find that everywhere. And it won't just be searching for the pain and avoiding it. It will be searching for the pleasure and experiencing it. And that's two completely different ways to live your life.
It is. There's
subconscious. You don't have to think about it. You eventually attune the other way.
So I wanted to wrap up our episode with the five senses and being able to provide an experience that you could practice for each sense in a very sensually connected way. And maybe you could tie this into sex as well. So, for example, how can we build a whole sensual slash sexual experience around sound, sight, taste, touch, what else? Smell?
I think
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I think this will be a fun little exercise, and then people could kind of riff off that, like take your suggestions and then, start to think about it themselves. Like, how would I want to start practicing that?
When it comes to touch, something I love to play with is the four elements. So what is fiery touch like? What is watery touch like? What is earth and air, right? These different types of feeling sensation. And also, I love to invite people to touch and explore different parts of their body that they never found pleasure or sensuality in before. Like, where's somewhere you never thought, oh, I'm going to touch that and have a pleasurable experience, right? Avoid the typical place. That would be for touch. Sound experiences can either go with, a partner making sound, you making sound. That can also be very powerful, liberating your voice with sound, letting yourself play with that, or your partner making sound for you, playing with sound of touch, right? Again, kink is a great way for that too. Flogging makes different sounds. It's super cool that way. But also you can play with having silence. If you have complete silence and even maybe darkness, you can play with energetic attunement a lot more. Or you can play with sound where you have a playlist that is intentional, different vibes, different energies, whatever it might be. Singing as well is an amazing one. So I would say that would be sound. Smell, you can play with different scents, but be careful with scent too, because you don't want artificial scent. Like a lot of people buy like Bath and Body Works candles and stuff, like throw that shit in the garbage. It's the worst for you. So just make sure you have scents that are more body friendly. Also, something I love to play with scent and sensation in general, I love to bring flowers are one of my absolute favorite play toys. Whenever I go to a sex party, I bring a bouquet of roses and I hand them out, and we flog each other, or you can pull them apart and it creates this beautiful sensation of flowing over you. Or I like to smush them in people's faces so they can smell, like they have to smell roses while they're being stimulated somewhere else. Like, oh, they're my favorite thing ever. So smelling of flowers or like actual food or whatever it might be. I mean, I love pheromone smell. Armpits is a big turn on for many people. Also, I know though neurodivergent people have that sometimes fear of smell too. So, getting in the shower before you have sex can be really helpful. There's all different kind of options there. And then taste with food, right? Berries, chocolate, bitter chocolate too. If someone's having a very deep experience and they are actually having a hard time integrating, bitter chocolate can really help bring people back to the present space. I like frozen berries are fun to play with, and they're a little, they can draw too. Like they leave some color on you, which is fun. And then you can lick it up. Syrup. I'm thinking of parties I've been to. We got crazy with syrup in one. It's messy, but yeah. So thinking about logistics too of mess. And then sight would be another one. So either playing with sight deprivation is really fun. Either turning lights off or blindfolding can be really helping the other senses heighten. The thing about sight too is it can be really distracting. So
I was about to say,
yeah, if you're in an environment of a room with like a lot of stuff going on. I remember I showed up at this lover's house once and I was like, oh my God, like we cannot have sex in this room. Like there's too much going on here. Like
you're like, the dust everywhere on that table right there is bothering me.
Yeah. So deprivation of sight, I think, is typically how people play with it. But you also can think of photography can be really fun to play with sight, or video, or describing sight. An amazing practice I like to do is genital worship. And before you touch the genitals, you just describe compliments for them. So that can be really intimidating and scary, but also it feels like there's a lot of armor up at the beginning. But when you start receiving compliments about your genitals, you're like, whoa, like I've never heard that before. So it can also be very disarming in the end of that practice. But at first it feels very scary. Or just description, you know?
Yeah, that's a good one. So maybe even playing around with complimenting a certain aspect of your person and describing it almost through a poem or like a metaphor.
Yes.
So not just your hair looks good, but your hair looks like the way that a willow tree sways in the wind, things like that.
Exactly. And aesthetics matter, right? Wear the lingerie, wear the jewelry, play with the textures. Flowers, like I said, one of my favorite. Wear the costume, wear the, do it up. It's the art of seduction and creating ritual around it is really a big point to everything I'm making here.
I love everything that you suggested. And I feel like you've given so many good starting points for people to start practicing. I even learned so much. There was a lot of things you said where I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect. I understood that before. It's just you put the words to it and it kind of solidified it in my head where I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. But all of this to say, this conversation was so lovely, so enlightening. I got so many chills throughout all of it. I hope everyone listening has resonated and gained something from it as well. Like we both said, don't just listen to this, actually go out and start putting it into practice, start integrating it, because it's not enough just to understand it intellectually. You're all sensual beings, and it's important to start putting these things into practice and be consistent and fostering safety and rediscovering your joy and your sensuality again, Is there anything you would want to share with people who want to go and discover you further if they resonated with you?
Absolutely, yes. So my Instagram and TikTok is 𝗪𝐿𝐴 and 𝗪𝐿ALune.com for my website. You can book one-on-one consults with me. It's a safe space to ask the questions where you cannot ask anywhere else, or whatever you're going through. I will promise to hold you in a shameless, safe way. That's for any gender whatsoever, any sexuality, anything on the topic of sex, love, and relationships. And then I have a membership / sex magic school. It's called the 𝗪𝗪𝗁𝗄𝐿, and it is somatic practices that are guided as well as lectures. There's lots of information there. It's a community. We have new moon and full moon rituals that are live every month where I teach live. They're always a different practice. And then the hour after that is community connection and Q&A. So lots of access to me. That's my main space of community where I teach. I also have retreats sometimes. So get on my newsletter. It's super juicy. Lots of free information there. But mainly it's the school that is for women and vulva beings. My work is very queer inclusive, also trans inclusive. My space is really important that I have the advocacy and the activism there as well. And it's been such a pleasure to be here and keep going on your journey. If you hear that whisper inside of you, it is there for a reason. So follow it.
Yeah, tune into it. Thank you, Nadia, for being on my channel. This was so pleasurable.
Yeah.
This is so pleasurable. If you guys loved this episode, please let us know. If you guys want her back, please let us know. But other than that, make sure you guys stay regulated, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.